Sorry, it's Richard Wilkes again from AI. Just a couple of quick points. I noticed in Ross's presentation you had a table up on Part L, and that showed the, in comparison with the nearly zero energy building table, the Part L showed the notional building values.
Yeah.
I asked this question to an NHBC technical guy a few weeks ago about how many of the volume house builders are actually building houses to the notional dwelling table now. So those of you who haven't seen it, it's basically U values of 0.18. They have a backstop value in Part L now of 0.3. Yeah. And the air tightness of the backstop is 10. And the notional dwelling is half of that, 5. So obviously much enhanced values. Yeah. But I don't think not many people are building to that. If you talk to the big boys, you could go to the backstop values and use a get out of jail card, bolting on loads of renewables to hit your SAP calculation targets. And I don't know, as energy assessors or whatever, I mean, I'd love to know some feedback about how many schemes are going through on notional dwelling. That'd be interesting. Another thing about overheating, just an observation really, we have this passion about using cut and pasted design schemes on the UK for standard house types that just put on an estate plan, no relevance to orientation or site-specific detailing. With overheating, surely that is a basic principle of designing your building to be site-specific, which would get over lots of issues. And that's just really an observation and a bit of a moan, really. But thank you.
Shall I answer to start with, and then you guys can pick up? Yeah. So if I can take the first one around the notional, my understanding, and you'll hear more this afternoon from Stuart actually about the AMC4 project, is many of the mainstream developers are responding in different ways, and of course, yeah, that notional is not necessarily representative of mainstream, but what we are seeing is a real focus on air tightness. So within the conventions, and you might be able to correct me, Stuart, if I get it wrong, but if you don't actually pressure test individual dwellings, you get a punishment of an uplift on the assumption in the calculation. Yeah. And it can be quite significant. It's 2? 2. Yeah, 2. So a lot of the mainstream developers, as standard practice, are pressure testing at much higher frequency of dwellings, which can only be a good thing. The other thing is that a lot of them are finding thermal bridging, as we heard before, is a very, very cost-effective way of improving their delivery. So they are actually doing their own bespoke psi-value junction calculations on the entire range of products. So for me, I think that's really encouraging. You're right, the notional will never be representative because people have different supply chains and therefore different routes to cost-effective delivery. But I think we are seeing people really focusing on the fabric energy efficiency, because the first wave of experiences with some of the low and zero carbon technologies, for a variety of reasons, have left some of the majors quite stung. So they're going for the fabric, really robust, fit and forget approach, and you'll hear more about that this afternoon.
And there's one question, Stuart.
Yeah, Stuart O'Garner from Stuart Milne Group. It's kind of linked to that, Ross, and one for David. I know obviously Scotland's slightly different to England in terms of where we're going with the direction of travel, and it's looking like it's going to be PV across the board in Scotland at the expense of the fabric. So we're going to go backwards to tick a box for SAP. So Mrs. Miggins, David, who buys that house, right, may not get a benefit in her reduced energy bills, will not get the benefit in the saving the PV because there's no feed-in tariff, and unless she lives in the house to actually reduce her electricity bill, may actually end up paying more. How does that square?
Well, I think this is where I mean, this is, first of all, this is based on some work that Construction Excellence in Wales did a sort of smaller project where they did find evidence that EPCs do actually correlate with sort of lower bills in real life. So across the market, that is a situation. But I mean, I think this is why we're doing the project, because we need to look at issues like that and take factors like that into account in trying to assess what the real cost of a property will be. This isn't about us mortgage lenders saying your home is simply an EPC B or C, therefore we'll lend you, £20,000 more. It has to be about taking into account a wide variety of factors, which will include the specific technologies that they're looking to fit or have fitted.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great project, and if you pull it off, fabulous. But there is a focus on carbon rather than energy, and that's a different thing.
got two more questions. We'll have one here as the mic's already here, if we may. Oh, we've got another one, my goodness. No expense spared.
Okay, it's Tom DeSaul from the Mineral Products Association. It's a question for Ross. Could you just say a little bit more about the cost optimal review? Who's going to do it? How does it relate to Part L? And what are the implications?
You've got me in the Achilles heel. So, as I understand it at the moment, and I'm actively digging to find more, it will be a open tender via DCLG as it was last time. So I don't know who will do it. How does it relate to Part L? My belief is it will be a fundamental part of whether there will be a Part L update or not prior to nearly zero energy buildings. Because if the conclusion was to say, well, we're already at cost optimal for nearly zero energy, it's not the only thing that would trigger a Part L, but I'm sure it would be a significant part. And then, just to add to that, I think it's particularly worth noting that we can't really change SAP or the assumptions within SAP or some of the technicalities within SAP out of sequence with Part L, because it would be sort of changing the challenge for industry by default via the back door. So we may see a change in Part L and SAP anyway, just because we have learnt more and the world has changed, grid intensity, primary energy of the different fuels as it would be at that point in time. So it will be a key part. There was a third part of the question.
No, I think that's it.
Okay.
So we'll have the one more question and then we'll...
Christian Yalki from Eco Building Boards. Two things. One is the first presentation, Stuart's quality homes. On your slides you showed and you mentioned that increase of airtightness having an advantage and reducing the risk of faults and condensations. Very often, actually, it has the opposite effect. If you improve airtightness, which is relatively easy, and still have cold bridging, you actually increase the risk of mold, and so it's one of these examples where you deal, if you don't have a holistic approach, if you don't, if you just deal with one aspect, you create more and additional problems. And the same was when you look at overheating and natural light. Again, you increase one, but then you obviously increase the larger windows, but you increase the risk of solar ingress. The other one was on the financial side. I'm sure you had a look at, I'm from Germany, and I'm sure you had a look at the KfW schemes and so on and so on, so a green bank effectively. If you compared what they've been doing quite successfully over a long time, the approach, people taking out the loans, they're usually much higher than you had with your Green Deal, roughly maybe 40,000 euro on average. Fixed mortgage, fixed interest rate of 1.5, so they can calculate. They didn't look at payback times because the reduction in energy costs, your payback time is quite long. But still, I think they have a turnover of 1.5 to 2% of that existing housing stock. So it's been successful, it's very popular, everybody uses the facility, and they look at long-term payback times. Just as an example how these schemes can work and how the benefits are measured.
Just to pick up on your first point, you're absolutely right. We can't look at each individual issue in isolation. Some of the issues we've come up against with condensation have occurred where people are designing to achieve 7 when they air test. If they're actually coming in at a 3 or 4, they're running into issues not being able to ventilate a property. So we do need to have a really joined up approach. Like you say, we cannot look at one issue as standalone because everything has a knock-on impact on other items.
Thank you. Sorry, yes, I was going to give you a big round of applause then.
I think just on the financing point, I think it's, and the KfW example, it's no secret that we and many other stakeholders would have liked to have seen the Green Deal, with a much lower interest rate, financed through the Green Investment Bank. Clearly that didn't happen. And I think it's a shame that, or I am hopeful rather, that the pay-as-you-save mechanism may not be taken off the table altogether, and we may well be sort of still looking at some public subsidy. I suppose the policy context, as I tried to set it out at the start of this project, is to say, okay, well, we've got a government that is not prioritising support for energy efficiency, renewable energy and build in homes at the moment. What can we do by working with the finance industry to actually come up with a private sector solution that might work for everyone?
Thank you. Can we have a round of applause?